The Meaning of the Mark, Part 2. The How of Paul Omar's Philosophy. Man is an organ of life, and God alone is life. Swedenborg. The philosophy of Paul Omar teaches that the kingdom of God is life, on this earth right now, and that man has been given the power to become the most important factor in it. The requirements necessary to harness this power, however, baffle accomplishment by their extreme simplicity. Man, in his worldly wisdom, is using less than 1% of his God-given power of achievement. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, as interpreted by Omar, means to accept the bounteous gifts of wealth, health, happiness, and understanding offered by God in return for your expressing his purpose on this earth. God's apparent purpose for man's life on earth is progress towards a life of individual and united love, which means a harmonious existence, one with another, brought about by the understanding and operation of his fixed laws. Merely giving you the simple rules to accomplish with brief instructions is their use, while beneficial is not necessarily satisfying. You want to know the reasons back of the rule, and therefore we must start with the fundamentals, the laws and explanation of them, so that you may use this knowledge to offset the false conceptions you now have. The three fundamentals. The first fundamental is that man has a mind, objective in character, being the function of the physical brain. It is the outgrowth of man's physical necessities, and its normal method of observation is through the five physical senses. It is man's material and physical guide. Its highest function is that of reasoning by inductive, deductive, analytic, and synthetic methods. The mind of man, while possessing no powers whatever independent of physical organization, directs man's destiny. It has, in general, little or no faith beyond objective reason. The mind of man, under normal conditions, is not controllable against his will, his reason, his positive knowledge, or the evidence of his senses by the mind or suggestion of another. For our purpose, let us define inductive reasoning as starting from certain practical facts rather than from a general law. The propositions derived from inductive reasoning do not cover every single case of the law it endeavors to establish. Inductive reasoning accepts as truth a theory which cannot be proved except by results. Inductive reasoning starts with a theory to fit the facts, then proceeds to verify the results, observing errors, and if necessary, formulates a new theory on the basis of observed data, avoiding the errors. The necessity for inductive reasoning is lack of knowledge concerning the central fact or concerning the law governing the facts. The second fundamental is that man has a soul, which is a distinct entity possessing independent powers and functions. The soul has a mental organization of its own and is capable of sustaining an existence independent of the body. It is the substance, essence, and expression of faith, possessing a dynamic force independent of body, capable of any accomplishment. It is the seat of all emotions, and is in constant, absolute control of every function, condition, and sensation of the body. It is the storehouse of memory, and never discards any thought or action of the mind. The soul can and does communicate with the souls of other people. This faculty is unlimited by time and space. It communicates with the mind intuitively. Knowing all of nature's or God's law, the soul has no need for, and is incapable of, inductive reasoning, but is all capable of deductive reasoning. Its one limitation is inability to formulate its own premises. This means that the soul can start no activity whatever without instruction from the mind to do so. The third fundamental is that suggestion is the all-potent factor of both soul and mind. The soul of man is unqualifiedly and constantly amenable to the mind of man and power of suggestion. Suggestions from the mind, often registered unconsciously, are constantly guiding and controlling the functions of the soul. The soul of a man is more amenable to the suggestions of his own mind than to suggestions from the mind of another. The control of soul by mind, which is mortal and physical, makes man a free moral agent with the power to train or direct his soul for weal or woe. There you have the three fundamentals of Omar's philosophy boiled down for the purpose in mind, namely understanding a simple method that will give you any and everything you want. You do not necessarily have to believe this statement to accomplish the result. Right thinking is necessary. How can I get what I want, whether or not it is good for me or not to have? I'll take a chance. Give me that million is about the verbal expression of the non-thinking human being, and to the outburst might well be added, how can I get it for nothing and keep everyone else from having it? The philosophy being explained to you assumes to do the very thing, provided it is your wish. You are promised anything you want if you can follow the right path. Later on you will be given 3 laws, which work as positively as all laws of nature, but for the present we will analyze the 3 fundamentals. Briefly, the fundamentals state that while your soul has ultimate control of every happening in your life, nevertheless, your soul has no self-starter. Mind alone does the starting. Your mind or another's. In other words, your soul is constantly directing your body in its functions, telling each atom what to do. Therefore, if your mind is telling or suggesting to your soul to do something which your reason says is not good for you, naturally you are getting what you direct and are causing a thing not good for you to happen. It is very important that this situation be thoroughly understood. You may not want something to happen, but if you fear it, naturally you are thinking about it and the soul acts on this thought. You are making your own conditions by your own thoughts. Faith is the essential prerequisite to the successful exercise of power. Christ, while living on this earth in the man Jesus, being limited by God's laws for mortals, did not hesitate to acknowledge his inability to heal the sick in the absence of faith. Just why faith is necessary cannot be answered, but it is known and proved to be a fact. This statement need not be discouraging to you, as the first fundamental states that the mind has no faith beyond objective reasoning, while the second says that the soul is the substance and essence of faith, and the third fundamental explains that soul acts at the suggestion of the mind. It has no alternative. Therefore, it is not necessary that the mind believe the suggestion possible of accomplishment in order for the soul to obtain the result. After results have been accomplished time upon time, and the mind knows, by objective results, that the system operates without fail, then the mind also acquires faith. At this stage, nothing is impossible. For sake of emphasis, the faith required may be purely soul faith, and the requirement to soul action sincere mental desire, communicated by suggestion, not retarded by abnormal active opposition in the way of adverse suggestions from the mind. The famous Little Red Book, it works. Well, what about the million you want, or the new car, or many other material things of little value? Can they be obtained by just thinking about them? Yes, indeed, unqualified, according to this philosophy. But do you really think about what you want, or are you most of the time thinking and talking about what you do not want? Be fair with yourself in answering this question. Isn't it a fact that you are today getting just the things of which you think most? Wasn't today about what you expected it would be? The brain functions rather arbitrarily most of the time. The mind has thousands of thoughts in the course of an hour. The soul records them all and acts on the important thought. The most powerful and constant suggestion receives first attention. There is found in the book, It Works, a definite plan for soul communication. It reads as follows. Write down on paper in order of their importance the things and conditions you really want. Do not be afraid of wanting too much. Go to the limit in writing down your wants. Change the list daily, adding to or taking from it until you have it about right. Do not be discouraged on account of changes, as this is natural. There will always be changes and additions with accomplishments and increasing desires. 3 positive rules to accomplishment. Rule 1. Read the list of what you want 3 times each day, morning, noon, and night. Rule 2. Think of what you want as often as possible. Rule 3. Do not talk to anyone about your plan except to the great power within you, which will unfold to you, your mind, the method of accomplishment. The law of comeback. It would be hard to give a more concrete or more definite plan for suggesting to the soul, or for getting what you want, but have a care. Nothing so far has been said about the 3 laws, the first of which is, Law 1, As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye mete, withal it shall be measured to you again. Luke 6:38. You have heard this law quoted on many ways, and up to the present it probably has meant little to you. Be assured that it operates with exceedingly accuracy at all times. This law is called the law of karma, meaning comeback. Man receives only that which he gives. The game of life is a game of boomerang, man's thoughts, deeds, and words returning to him sooner or later with astounding accuracy. Often this is not in the nature of the desire for something. John and Bill were bosom friends living in different cities. John had an ideal home life, while Bill, at least in John's opinion, had a millstone around his neck in the shape of an indolent, lazy wife. John arrived in Bill's town one Saturday morning. Bill took John home to dinner. Mrs. Bill knew he was coming, but when they arrived there was a lack of a welcome, no indication of any preparation from dinner. Mrs. Bill was sitting in the living room complaining of the heat and suggested dinner at some convenient restaurant. Bill was somewhat upset, but turned in with a wonderful show of good humor. Got the dinner as though he were accustomed to it, and everything went off smoothly, with the exception of John's increasingly disgust for Mrs. Bill. He even told Bill what he thought, but Bill only laughed it off. John proceeded on his way, and for the next few years the principal topic of his conversation was poor Bill and his lazy wife. It took him just about 3 years to wake up to the fact that his own wife had changed, and was about as useless to him as any wife could be. Some 5 years later, Bill took a trip with his family and called on John. What he thought of Mrs. John is not known, but John noticed that Mrs. Bill was not half bad. In fact, he wished his wife were as companionable. Later, someone sent John that little red book, It Works. This started him in the study of correcting his condition. Both Mrs. John and Mrs. Bill are living ideally today, but the point is this. John, by his constant dwelling on Bill's lazy wife, offered a suggestion to the soul and received what he most thought of and least wanted, a lazy wife of his own. The story of Bill and John is true and illustrates the effect of the mind on the soul and the power of the soul to bring about the reality of a thought. You may say it just happened, but when thousands of such events happen in the same way, it ceases to be coincidental. John was sowing a crop of lazy wives, and the harvest could not have been otherwise. Had he, regardless of his opinion, expended the same time and attention and remarks to the charming qualities of Mrs. Bill, his wife, as well as Bill's, would have been what he helped them make them, industrious and charming. Nothing just happens. There is a reason for every result. There is a cause for every effect. Do you think it was a coincidence that all these sages of old expressed in one way or another what we know as the Golden Rule? Do unto others as you would they should do unto you. Why should they recommend such a procedure if it were not profitable? Does not this really imply, you may expect others to treat as you treat them? Or whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Would you like to prove it this day? Well, start out with love in your heart for every human being alive, and you will receive love in return today. Hate, and hate will return to you. Cheat, and you will be cheated. Give, and you will receive. Hold back, and it shall be held back from you. There is no evading this law, and it goes further. If you secure something through your soul power, and by so doing injure another, you will pay in full, no more, no less, in the same mysterious way you received and injured. That is the way law number 1 operates. And because of the observation of this law, the Golden Rule was recommended and even explained as a summary of the law by the Hebrews of old. It is wisdom. Is it wisdom or ignorance to disregard such a law when we see it in our daily operation? Pause and think this over, because you are going to prove the power of the soul to give you what you want by actual results, and it is of vital importance that you use this power wisely. You may be ever so wise, but you cannot change the law of compensation. You will receive in proportion to what you give, measure for measure. This is God's law, a gift to you and all mankind. There are enough riches in the world to make every man a millionaire without injury to another. There is also a plentiful supply of poverty for all who desire it, but it is rather difficult to acquire without injury to yourself and others. Mrs. Annabel Grayson was not her name, but she was 62 years old and the wife of a minister. Her husband, the Reverend Mr. Grayson, died in 1927, leaving an estate of some $5,500, $3,500 of which was represented by a certificate of stock in a well-known automobile company headed by an aviation ace. Just how this stock was acquired is not known, but the company was in the hands of a receiver at the time of Mr. Grayson's death. The stock was worth not more than 10 cents on the dollar and could not be sold for 5. Mrs. Grayson interviewed an attorney who, for the sum of $25, investigated her chances and informed her that the stock was valueless. Then someone sent her the book, It Works, containing the plan and rules you have read. Probably Mrs. Grayson was not so well informed in business matters, but she at least was sensible enough to take a chance, as it cost nothing. She wrote down that she wanted instructions in converting a certificate for $3,500 into real money. In less than a week, she had convinced herself that the Reverend Alward Jones, and this is not his name, of Indianapolis, who went through the seminary at Greensburg with her husband, would help her. Her soul could and probably did tell her this. So she went to Indianapolis and put the problem before him. He was helpless, having no experience in the investment field, but suggested their calling on Franklin Willis, not his real name, president of an automobile manufacturing company, who was one of his parishioners. Willis listened to the story, looked at the certificate, and then at the little gray-haired lady, so sweet in her simplicity, saying, "Mother, the lawyer who told you this stock was no good did not know his business. I will cash it for you. Take this check of mine to the Union Trust Company. Sign your name on the back, and they will give you the $3,500. And when you get home, tell that lawyer to give you back your $25 because he erred." Just another coincidence, was it? The stock is not now worth 10 cents on the dollar, but the automobile manufacturer followed a hunch, which came to him shortly after the occurrence, to lower the price of his line of cars and do another more radical and apparently unreasonable thing in connection with his marketing. As Mrs. Grayson's gain, brought about by him, took her estate from the debt to the credit side of the ledger, so did the changes in price and method put the automobile company on a handsome profit basis the following year. Another coincidence brought about by sowing the right kind of seed and reaping a full, rich harvest. Mrs. Grayson told her part of the story. A news item in an automobile magazine furnished the data for the finish. Do not let the fear of the action of the karmic law keep you from using your soul power to gain any possession that may be of benefit to yourself or others. In most cases, your common sense is a safe guide. If there is doubt in your mind that you may be injuring others, make your request or petition conditional upon the general welfare of God's approval. Cast on him the burden of the decision and its result. Your soul will answer you intuitively. You also have the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule to guide you. Anything not in violation of these 3 guides for human action, which have stood the test of time, is good for you to have. Riches, health, happiness, and love. Proceed according to the plan and follow the 3 rules taken from It Works. Write down what you want. Keep it in your mind constantly. Figure out how you might possibly get it. Affirm it is already yours in the idea, and have by this action of the mind planted the seed in the soul. You have started something, and if it will nourish it by continued affirmation and act upon the intuitive message from your soul, you will accomplish your desire. Your soul may tell you to work for it along certain lines, or it may come to you in a way of coincidence, so-called, but remember, when it comes, no matter in what way, give thanks to God for giving you a soul power capable of the accomplishment. In other words, thank your soul, whether or not your mind believes your soul had anything to do with the result. If you do this, your mind will finally have faith, and then, with the combined faith of soul and mind, you can accomplish the impossible. If, on the other hand, you consider your accomplishment a coincidence and make this affirmation or attribute the result to your own natural-born cleverness, you will not encourage belief in or use of your soul power, consciously or intelligently. Mary Humphrey is a private secretary to the president of a large hardware manufacturing concern. She received It Works. The plan sounded foolish, but she thought it worth a trial. So she wrote down that she wanted a diamond ring. Then she followed the details of selecting the ring, wrote down the jeweler's name, the price of the ring, the setting chosen, and diligently read what she had written for 4 days, but nothing happened. She decided it was all hooey, to use her term, and told her employer about the silly book. He read it and told her it was the finest plan for accomplishment he knew, incidentally inquiring if she had tried it. "Yes," replied Mary, "but it didn't work." This was in October. On the 25th of December of that year, Mr. and Mrs. Employer gave Mary the identical ring she had selected. Just how he found the slip with the written desire and description on the ring is not known, but Mary is still telling of the remarkable coincidence, and the poor, overly wise girl who performed this simple accomplishment by soul power is still in ignorance of her power of possession. Her total result was just 1 ring ahead, which is really pathetic. Here is another ring incident. Rose Marie is an employee at a beauty parlor in Chicago. Weekly she did the hair of Mrs. Gaylord. One day she related at her customer how she had paid $1 a week on a ring in a jewelry club. Each week she was told that she could win and assured that no one could contribute 50 weeks without winning. She won after depositing $45, but having the ring appraised, she found it worth about $2. Now, $45 was a fortune to Rose Marie, and Mrs. Gaylord was much concerned. She took the matter up with Mr. Gaylord, who that day had read It Works. He suggested that she write down her desire, so she wrote, "I want Rose Marie to get back her $45. And she diligently followed direction, but nothing happened for many days. Still she persevered. After 2 weeks' time, Mr. Gaylord interested himself in the matter. He called on the police department but did not get very far. Several days later, he called on the vice president of a leading Chicago newspaper, who gave him a letter to the police official. Then action started. A plainclothes man, accompanied by Mr. Gaylord, called at the office of the jewelry club where the money was refunded. That night, Mr. Gaylord said to his wife, "You may scratch off that one want from your list. Here is Rose Marie's $45. Call this coincidence, but if the plan had not been followed on, and if Mr. Gaylord had never heard of it through the book, Rose Marie would never have recovered her money. These true stories are told to encourage and persuade you consciously to direct your soul power. When you fail to do so consciously, rest assured you do so unconsciously, usually to your detriment. You may get some consolation out of the alibis for your condition in life, but after reading the plan, the rules, and the experiences of others, there is certainly no excuse for at least not trying to demonstrate God's great gift, your soul power for achievement. Verse: the vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, this you will build your life by, this you will become. James Allen. A desire in your heart for anything is God's sure promise sent beforehand to indicate that it is yours already in the limitless realm of supply. H. Emil Caddy. Silence fosters faith. Rule 3 in It Works tells you not to talk of your plan or the result of your experiments with soul power. This reason is twofold. If you have been unsuccessful, most of your listeners will agree with you that the plan is foolish. If successful and you tell them about it, they will doubt you, and unless you have a firm conviction of this truth, you may lose the faith you have gained. Billy Hoyne was cross-eyed, a Christian Science practitioner. After several treatments, succeeded in straightening the eye. Billy knew it was straight. He saw it in the practitioner's mirror and was very happy. Just outside, he met a friend and said, "Look, Christian Science straightened my eye." The friend did not believe in Christian Science, and his face expressed his disbelief as he looked at Billy's eye. The doubt was communicated to Billy by telepathy. "You're crazy" was about the substance of the message, and he looked into the show window of the Marshall Fields to convince himself it was still straight. The result could not have been otherwise. He was afraid the eye might have gone crooked again, and it had. This story came direct from Billy to his employer. His eye was straightened again by the same practitioner, but not until 6 months later. While this is a tribute to Christian Science, and many remarkable accomplishments are performed in that faith, any one of a dozen other methods would have gotten the same result. To be as easily reversed as this one was that day when Billy inadvisably talked to his doubting friend and then looked in the window. This is a true story and a good illustration of why you should not talk to the power of possession until you have a conviction which cannot be shaken or changed. John Weitzel was a day laborer. His wife Helen did odd jobs to increase the family income. They promised themselves that Anna, their 3-year-old daughter, would have an education and advantages denied them. Then a second daughter, Mary, was born. The doctor said she was blind. Helen Weitzel, strong in her Catholic faith, took her problem to God. She did not question the cause of the tragedy. She only wanted relief from it. The child's eyesight returned. Her only hope sprang from simple faith in a healing shrine. She knew that thousands were healed each year at St. Anne de Dupree, so they decided to take the baby there. John was not in favor of her spending their money to do so. He reasoned if the doctors could not help Mary, there was no hope. But Helen, braving the harshness of her husband with undaunted courage, took the family saving for the trip. At St. Anne, she went up the steps on her knees, a prayer on every step, but no miracle happened. Home she came, still strong in her faith. She had seen others healed and reasoned that her prayers were not correctly said. Perhaps, because of John's attitude, they were not. Immediately she went to work as a scrub woman, at night to earn the money for another trip. 2 years later, she made a second pilgrimage. Again, she went up the steps, again she prayed, and again nothing happened. Home again, she once more began to work and save for the third trip. 2 years passed, years of toil and undaunted faith. When Mary was 5 years old, this courageous mother again took her child to the healing shrine. Halfway up the long flight of steps, the miracle happened. The eyes of the child were open. Helen's great faith had won. No one can tell Helen Weitzel that God did not do this, and she is right. She worked his law correctly. There was no interference from John the third time. Her over-towering faith had surmounted every obstacle. The doctors might claim that some dirt or grit in the child's eyes had cut the film which covered the pupils. Could Helen believe this? Would she say it just happened? Mary is now 25 years old and a private secretary with a beautiful pair of strong blue eyes. She wears no glasses. Anne, her sister, a brilliant businesswoman, told me this story. It is repeated to you to illustrate the effect of soul power. Great souls rely on God. What difference does it make what method is used if the result is secured? St. Anne de Dupree and those God-fearing priests of old who started this healing shrine have relieved thousands upon thousands of suffering humanity. And if your soul suggests a visit to St. Anne, obey the suggestion. If the Christian Science or your physician, follow the suggestion. It may be true and doubtless that one great source of the power of drugs to heal disease is attributed to the suggestion of the mind to the soul of the patient at the time the drug is administered. This being true, it follows that when a patient believes in drugs, drugs should be administered. Anything within or without reason you can do to make the mind behave as you wish should be done. Whether the found horseshoe be nailed toes up or toes down makes little difference if the result is obtained. Many a horse chestnut carried in the left trouser pocket has cured rheumatism of long standing, and the bones of many people always ache just before a storm. We laugh at the absurdity of the old Indian medicine man who painted his face so grotesquely and waved frantically a highly colored bladder while performing his cure, but his methods worked. Today, for mental effect, we often find a beautiful bouquet of American beauties in the operating room of the mental healer. The mind of man is swayed in numerous ways, and fortunate indeed is he who has found the key to the control of his mind. Or in other words, fortunate indeed is he who has learned how to pray so that his prayers are answered. An outstanding personality in Chicago, Father David Gibson, head of the Cathedral Shelter, Episcopal at Peoria Street and Washington Boulevard, is such a man. At the shelter, the bread line at fortunate times seemed to be without end. Food, clothing, and shoes must be had in enormous quantities, but all are fed and clothed and comforted. When Mr. Gibson is out of shoes, he prays for shoes and gets them. His needs are supplied, his prayers are answered. The same prayers said with the same vocal expression before the same altar by someone else might bring no result. The difference is simply this. Father Gibson knows that he will get the shoes or anything else needed. He puts the situation up to God, and the shoes or whatever else it is arrives. The average person is sure such a procedure could not possibly be reasonable. Of course, to such a mind it is not. To make the mind behave as you wish it to, or to have your prayers answered, is not an easy matter. Even after you have actually proved this, it can be accomplished. And if any material object, the crucifix, a holy shrine, a bouquet of flowers, the sea, a mountain peak, a dose of medicine, or a painted bladder will assist you, by all means use it. As a man thinketh, so is he. In a small Ohio town lives an inventor whose name is known over the world. He has studied and understands most of the systems of accomplishment by so-called mind-over-matter methods. He has proved beyond any doubt that he can, by faith of his mind and soul, accomplish results apparently impossible to all material and scientific laws. He lives in a beautiful country house, surrounded by his birds, flowers, and dumb animal friends, demonstrating with them and obtaining results which, if told, would detract from, rather than add to, the object of this book. They are unreasonable, apparently unreal, and cannot be believed by others, even when actually proved by the sense of sight and hearing. You would presume, then, that such a man, having demonstrated the power of God capable of such miracles, would have the ability to control his mind under all conditions, but such is not the case. Many years ago he was afflicted with what physicians termed weak valvular control. The valves of the heart and other organs fails to function at certain times, causing collapse. These collapses usually occur when he is in the company of acquaintances who know of his afflictions and who are momentarily expecting a collapse. The mind of the acquaintance apparently communicates to him by telepathy. The valves cease to work, and down he goes, usually at a most embarrassing moment or in the most inconvenient place. Proof that such collapses are controllable by the mind was unquestionably demonstrated by the writer this last summer. The inventor was showing me his new car, driving at the rate of 60 or more miles per hour with perfect control. But upon alighting at the far end of the estate to issue instructions to some of his workmen, the valve thought took possession of him and he started to sway. In less than 2 seconds I had a cigar in my mouth, felt for a match and said loudly, "Darn the luck, I haven't a match, have you one?" The effect was instantaneous. His hand went to his vest pocket for a match. The valve thought was arrested and the body became normal. The inventor knew he was going. He knew why he snapped out of it. When I suggested that I drive the car home, he said, "Don't be afraid. I never have any trouble when I'm driving. That is why I drive so fast. I can't think of anything except controlling the car." In other words, the valve trouble came only when he thought of it. There are 2 reasons for this illustration. First, to show the difficulty of erasing the wrong idea that has become established in the mind, a difficulty justifying the use of suggestion supplied by a material object or otherwise. Second, that when this inventor friend of mine reads his own case, he may be awakened to see the foolishness of his own situation, and to find the method of forcing his mind to continually suggest a perfect physical organism. A proven plan of accomplishment. In the plan copied from It Works, the material object suggested as an assistance in directing the mind is your written list of what you want, definitely described in detail. If money, the amount you want and how you might get it. If an automobile, the make, color, price, and where sold. If a trip, where, when, and with whom. You are told to make a written list because your vacillating mind is prone to forget. You read your list 3 times a day to fix it firmly in your mind, and you talk of your plan to no one, lest they may weaken your faith by wrong suggestion. As long as you live, your soul is constantly acting upon the suggestions that are dominant in your mind. You must realize that on yourself alone rests the responsibility of directing your life and fortune. Hence you must correctly and intelligently govern your mind's action at all time. You were told that the requirements were so simple that you might overlook them, and you, time upon time, have agreed with the saying, "As a man thinketh, so is he." But it should mean more to you now, inasmuch as you must understand the importance of consciously directing your thought. What about the millions? Are you still thinking it is not for you? Possibly 100,000 is all your vision can encompass. Whether it is to be a $5 increase in the weekly pay envelope or the blue slip of dismissal, whether it is to be the announcement that you have been appointed to control or reduced to the ranks, whether you are to be one of the 400 or one of the 4 million is up to you personally. If you really want to accomplish something, you must start. Lay out a plan and follow it. Nothing of importance occurs without a plan, and one sure way to check up on the progress is to keep a diary of your daily actions and noting the results. Law number 1, as you sow, so shall you reap, is so simple and so true that most of us fail to follow it or realize its power. Therefore, take the golden square of Paul Omar. Plant it in your mind as a reminder of this law. Let it help to make the peculiar mind of yours act to your advantage. The unity of soul power. There is nothing more beneficial than someone's having confidence in you, and nothing more wholesome than your having confidence in someone else. Sometimes even pretended confidence works miracles. 40 years ago in a small town, a street faker was selling a mysterious concoction to which he gave the high-sounding name of the elixir of life. According to the lecture which preceded the sale, the concoction would cure all the pains and aches to which mankind is heir. To attract a crowd within the circle of light from the flaring torches of his gaudily painted wagon, he would give a talk of phrenology, illustrating his points with the aid of a human skull and of such small boys' subjects as he could induce to insist them. Arriving at the particular time in his phrenological discussion, when he required a human subject to operate upon, he called for volunteers. After a moment's hesitation, a small, unkempt figure mounted the steps that led to the wagon bed and stopped beside him. With good-natured ridicule, the crowd nudged one another and laughed hilariously. The subject who had volunteered was the son of Pete, the village drunkard, probably regarded as the sorriest specimen of the rising generation of the town. "If he's got any bumps on his head," said the voice, "the old man put him there with a club." The boy stood blinking in the light of the torches. He was plainly nervous and ill at ease. Yet there was a certain touch of courage in his daring. His public publicity had caught his fancy. The phrenologist, knowing the psychology of crowds, was quick to take advantage of this opportunity to play upon the humor of the audience. His nimble fingers searched over the boy's head. He turned him this way and that. He tilted his chin, then lowered it, keeping up a running fire of comment and explanation which convulsed the bystander. Here's a rare specimen, mental, motive type, a student, an executive, a leader, benevolent, courageous, industrious, forceful, dominant. So he rambled on until he see that the crowd weaved on in a jest. Then he abruptly dismissed the boy and turned enthusiastically to the sale of the elixir of life. The villagers watched him, but I watched the boy, and it seemed to me that there was a new look on his face, a new light in his eye, as though a dormant power within him had been awakened. He slipped from my sight, and the incident was forgotten. This last summer I visited the old town again. A street faker held forth in the square. So identical was he with the one of long ago that the incident of the boy came back to me. I turned to the old inhabitants who were with me. "By the way," I asked, "whatever happened to old Pete's boy?" He laughed. "Funny thing that," he replied. "Ever hear of the Honorable Henry Potter Donaldson, who made such a stir at the Capitol as representative of the state's big business interest? Well, that's him." What looked like a shabby trick played on old Pete's son was a joke to everyone but the boy. Strange to say, he believed it. Someone had confidence in him, and he was to be a big man as predicted. My friend, Tom Thrift, who told me this story, added, "Drop a pebble in a placid pond, and a ripple of it travels in ever-widening circles to the farthest edge. Drop a thought into a receptive mind, and the effect of it, for good or ill, permeates in ever-increasing measure to its farthest mental horizon." When Mohammed told Khadija, his wife, of his vision of heaven and his divine appointment, strange as it may seem, she believed him, and she was his first convert. Her confidence in Mohammed strengthened his belief and was greatly responsible for the success of the religion he founded. How true this is, and how fortunate indeed, is the child with parents sensible enough to prophesy a bright future for him or her instead of emphasizing shortcomings. Such parents do not consider the devastating effect of these negative suggestions planted in the alert and fertile mind of a child. A united soul desire of parent and child for a future success in the life of that child cannot fail to bring such a condition into reality. The power of suggestion from one mind to another, especially when the subject of the suggestion is agreeable and desirable to both, instantly contacts with both souls, and a united soul desire is the result. A prominent Rotarian, now living in Phoenix, Arizona, recently told me the following story about himself. One day, when I was about 16 years of age, while I was sitting on a bench watching two teams practice before starting a baseball game, I was talking to a catcher for the St. Louis Browns by the name of Buzz Keck, who had his finger broken and who was spending his time at home in DeSoto, Michigan, waiting for his finger to heal. He was the idol of all the boys who played ball. One of the players on the home team had his finger broken in practice, and the captain of the team came over where we were sitting and said to the professional to whom I was talking, "We sure have some bad luck. The game is ready to start, and we have no player to put in place of our shortstop." The professional said, "This kid is the best shortstop in the state. Put him in there." Then turning to me, he said, "Go under the grandstand, put on your suit, and show them how to play that position." I went into the game and got along all right until my time came to bat. The professional was sitting beside me as I said to him, "This is a hard place for me to come up to bat. There are 2 men on the bases, and they are going to walk this fellow to get a chance at me, and I will come with the bases full." He said, "It is the best place in the world for you to come up, as anyone can hit the ball when there is no one on base, but it takes a real batter to go up with the bases full and bring them in, and you can do it. Remember, he has to throw 3 strikes over the plate, and you only have to hit 1. No pitcher can throw 3 over without your hitting 1 of them. Remember also that either you are afraid of him or he's afraid of you. Don't be in a hurry to get to the plate. Stand outside of the batter's box, spit on your hands, tighten up your belt, and laugh at him. Let him know that you are not afraid of him, and you'll have the best of it. Let the first ball go by and keep laughing at him. He is not as good as the kid you have been playing with, and you are the best batter in the world at your age. I went to bat with the idea that I was the best batter. I hit a two-bagger and scored all 3 runs. I played against the same pitcher several times afterwards, and he often told me he would sooner pitch against anyone else, as I was always laughing at him and gave him a great deal of trouble. That great lesson of boyhood has been remembered in every walk of my life to this day. It shows what confidence will do and how it is strengthened by the confidence and suggestion of another. How few realize the great power of suggestion. Take a family of 4 living independently of the desire of each other, and the result is a disorganized, wrangling, unhappy group, each sincerely believing that one or all and the other 3 are responsible for their condition. There is little, if any, accomplishment by any one of the 4, and they would be much better off living separately unless the situation is corrected. Another family of 4 living for one another, each knowing and agreeing with the desires of the others, represent a soul strength 16 times as powerful as the first family mentioned. Each individual is accomplishing progress with the assistance of the other 3. The entire family progresses because of soul unity. When you can get someone pulling for you, believing in you, hoping and affirming your success, your chances are twice as good. You secure this, of course, by giving in like kinds to others. The united goodwill of its customers is one of the greatest assets of business because in unity there is always strength. To obtain genuine benefits, it is not sufficient merely to consolidate physical assets. The sole desire of executives, employees, distributors, and customers must be focused on a center of common interest. The success or failure of any business depends upon the opinion or sole desire of the people it touches. Both advertising and propaganda are used solely to secure mass approval in affairs of business, cities, states, nations, and in fact of the whole world. The law of majority. The character of the world is the result of the soul expression of the world, and as soul is amenable to mind. Naturally, as the world thinketh, so it is. As a nation, state, city, or business thinketh, so it is, and thus the second law in the philosophy of Paul Omar reads, Law 2. A united soul desire of a majority of the souls affected by the desire becomes a reality. The desire may not be for the best interest of the whole, but if the majority of the whole want it and are united in what they want, the soul of the whole, swayed by the majority, brings the desire into reality. Sometimes the propaganda of a few pulls the wool over the eyes of the many. Thus is created a desire for something which benefits only the few who originated the propaganda. People say a minority rules. Better say only a minority thinks with reason. You remember the peroration of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Law number 2 affirms the abiding truth of Lincoln's immortal words, that under God's law, government, in its finality, is and was and always will be, of and by and for the people. The question of whether such government is good or bad does not enter into the operation of the law. Law number 2 deals with unity of souls. 2 souls or all souls in existence, the soul of business organization, the soul of a village, city, nation, or state. Many soul desires affect only 2 persons or a small group. Sometimes a desire is the most horrible persecution, but the law operates with unfailing accuracy. The frenzied persecution of witchcraft at Salem is an example. Shall gossip hurt or help? Gossip is one of the most common methods of propaganda, creating soul desire of the small group. There's a natural impulse in people to repeat what they hear. Rumors are started and, like the pebble thrown into the pond, fly into the forest edge. Gossip is of 2 kinds, helpful and hurtful. The first is capable of producing beneficial results, improvements, goodwill, and profit. The second of inflicting injury, oppression, deterioration, and loss. When James Nason landed in Cedar Falls with his wife and 2 children, they were met at the depot by Rollins, the chauffeur for Dudley Kahn, president of the plant where Nason was to be head bookkeeper, at the modest salary of $85 a month, and house furnished. At the new home they met their guardian angel, Mary Gilroy, general helpwoman of the exclusive set in Cedar Falls, and self-styled cateress deluxe. Good News Mary, as she was called, knew everyone worthwhile, and better yet, was loved by all because of her never-failing cheerfulness and an inexhaustible supply of good news gossip. In less than a month, everyone in the village knew that the Nasons were lovely. Mary saw to that. The only apparent flaw lay in the fact that neither Mr. nor Mrs. Nason attended church. The children had entered the Sunday school and stood well in their classes. The boy soon became librarian of the music and books, and the girl an active member of the junior league. A year later, Mary tipped off the reason why the parents did not go to church. Mr. Nason is English, you know. He is very proud, and he won't go unless he can contribute along with the rest. They're lovely people and so conscientious. The next month, Nason was solicited to take charge of the accounts of the church at a fee, which he promptly refused to do except on one condition, that the fee be returned to the church as his contribution. This, of course, was quite satisfactory. That was the beginning of Nason's advance. Next, he took charge of the books and records of the community center. This work not only paid his contribution to the activity, but gave him a close contact with the majority of the parents and children in the community. He became one of the most popular citizens. "It would be a wonderful thing for you to have a car," suggested Mary Gilroy to Mrs. Nason one day. "Why don't you have one?" We will someday perhaps," was the reply, and Mary built her good news on this. Someday the Nasons will have a car. And before the summer was over, Charlie Brown, Buick agent, traded in a bargain. Then he went to Nason, and the terms were such that Sunday morning saw the Nasons arrive at church in a very attractive coupe. Mary Gilroy was more delighted than the Nasons, if that were possible. It is now 12 years since Mary Gilroy first started her good news gossip about the Nasons. James Nasons has a private office at the plant, and underneath his name on the door is Vice President Treasurer. Even the town of Cedar Falls has prospered, due greatly to the good news gossip of Mary Gilroy, the happiest and most successful of its town people. The success spoken of is not measured by dollars and cents, but in leadership for good. About the time the Nasons moved to Cedar Falls, another episode had its beginning in a far eastern city. John Harrison, experimental engineer, had for months worked long hours on a perplexing transmission problem. His theories seemed logical, but there were a few flaws somewhere. Jefferson Godfrey, head of the sales department, was a cruel, boisterous, unsympathetic go-getter, hiring and firing those he liked or disliked. He had earned his position by consistent hard work, mingled with a plentiful supply of shrewd politics and crafty tact. His disgust for John Harrison and for his failure to produce the equipment needed was manifest on every occasion. "Listen to me," he would say. "That man Harrison is just a plain nut. He should be put in a cage. He's crazy, I tell you." This affirmation was made not once but many times. Poor Harrison quite likely wasn't entirely himself. The long hours and worry were telling on him. One day when leaving the factory, his mind occupied by other things, he pushed outward on the street door, which opened in. The guard at the door saw him, and having heard the outburst of Godfrey repeated by others, enlarged upon the event. His story of Harrison's strange action with the rounds. The crew were actually sorry that John had gone dippy. That's about the way it was expressed. And in less than a year, John was actually in an asylum, where he died a few years later. This is by no means the end of this true story. 5 years later, Godfrey, at the height of his success, began to act queerly, was requested to take a leave of absence and rest for a year, but his domineering and unreasonable mind would not hear of it. Finally resigned entirely, soon lost his wealth, and he too was placed in a private sanatorium, dying a year later. Common sense tells you not to believe that the cause was unity of thought or soul power. You gladly agree with the Nason story because it turns out beautifully. But the Harrison case is too horrible for you to accept. Warm impulse says no. Cold reason, however, says yes. Nothing on earth could induce you to print in bold letters on the family mirror, "Our baby will die this year." Why not? Because it might happen, especially if anyone absorbed the thought printed. It is an exceedingly poor law which will not work both ways, and these true stories illustrate the effect of unity on thought in creating soul desire in small groups. May they also burn home the crime of hurtful gossip. There should be no doubt concerning the truth of the operation of Law 2 in the smallest group of associates. Lavater quotes, "A frequent intercourse and intimate connection between two persons make them so alike that not only their dispositions are molded like each other, but their very faces and tones of voice contact a certain analogy." And Shakespeare said, "It is certain that either wise bearing or ignorant carriage is caught as men take disease one another. Therefore let men take heed of their company." Society is formed by affinities. Judgment is largely formed in conversation with your associates. The sole desire of your group becomes a reality for the group in you. It is therefore prudent to frequent the society of your superiors, and make your life wholesomely progressive in the association of great men and good books. This is indeed good counsel to any young reader, as it is self-evident no advancement can be made by association with those who know less than you. Verse: Things bad begun make strong themselves by ill. Shakespeare. We shape ourselves, the joy or fear of which the coming life is made, and fill our future's atmosphere with sunshine or with shade. Whittier. Will you limit God's supply? The strength of a group or nation is not measured by number, but by unity of purpose or sole desire of the majority. So with the world. 66 nations have ratified the Kellogg-Briand Renunciation of War Treaty, hailed as a great modern step in the outlaw of war. With proper and continued publicity, the majority of souls in these 66 nations may firmly unite in a desire for peace. The reality of peace under such a condition is unquestionable, and peace would continue until the majority desire otherwise. The soul, character, and life of a nation is the reflection of the thoughts and action of the majority of the particles of which it is composed. The soul of a nation is affected in the same manner as the soul of an individual. The soul is constantly directing the actions of life, which cannot stand still. There is no stopping place, nor top or bottom to the ladder of life. When a nation or an individual becomes wealthy and powerful, it is in great danger. Christ said, "Verily I say unto you, a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven." Surely the accumulation of any sort of material objects, worthless rocks or valuable ores, diamonds, money, land, bits of broken glass or bright pebbles, could not of itself have any bearing on the subject. But it could and generally does affect the telling results the mind of men or nations. A top may have been reached, and there's no top for the soul. Life must be going in some direction, and if the mind is satisfied with the heights reached and does not direct the soul on what to do, the life of the nation or individual becomes like a ship without a rudder, ending on the rocks of destruction. Majority rules, therefore. A so-styled, self-sufficient man or nation becomes a minority and cannot advance. What stars shine brightest at the top of your ladder of desire? When you reach it, what then? You will have to select another higher up to strive for, or else go down as so many do, carried swiftly along in the current of vanity, self-sufficiency, and minority. The amount placed upon the price mark of success by most of us is ridiculously low. When we stop to think of it, just a little power over a few, just a few more dollars than our neighbors, and we reach our heights of success. Do not pass this statement too quickly, as it is of vast importance. There is in the mind of most individuals a hope for success, a hope to reach the top. Of how many there are who become self-sufficient, vain, and of no value. Whatever to the world, with only a taste of the bounteous supply of success God has prepared for all. Joe Bosher, 18-year-old apprentice, became a junior salesman at 21. His salary increased during this period from $50 to $150 a month. At 22, he was made a senior salesman on a commission basis. Within a very short time, he sold, unassisted and with much credit to himself, the largest single order ever received by his company to that day. The commission amounted to over $2,000. Joe reached his top, the height of his desire, as many others have and will. In spite of good advice from a sales manager and others interested in the success of his bright young man, Joe could not think of any further progress. He had arrived. He was good. He knew it. He needed no advice from anyone. He was self-sufficient. He purchased a small car and hired a chauffeur. At least the sales manager said so. Joe called the chauffeur his junior salesman, but nevertheless, for several months, he lulled in magnificence the back seat while the chauffeur drove and sales dropped off. It was about 10 years ago when Joe reached the top, arriving at the bottom 2 years later. He is now with another firm in a different line at a salary of $125 a month. Are you sure this could not happen to you? Of course you are, but have a care. It is such an easy matter for most humans to reach the top round the ladder of the desire. The power of humility. Paul Omar conquered his material top early in life and was on the downgrade until that eventful Sunday in Seattle when he discovered that the fundamentals of mind and soul, the law of karma and the law of majority were not all. There was another power greater than these. True it was, the fundamentals had been proved to be correct, and the two great laws worked with unerring accuracy. His symbol of the golden square had brought the desired result by keeping his mind in the constant direction of his objective goal. The goal itself seemed helpful to the majority, was desired by the majority, and so became a reality. It was all so simple that he began to doubt it. He doubted the benefit, and he doubted himself. He had in fact reached the end of his mind, having accomplished everything he had set out to do, but it was not sufficient. His soul demanded more. Mind, that function of the human brain guided largely by the senses, could not think more. Lowell expresses his predicament when he says, "It is only the intellect that can be thoroughly and hideously wicked. It can forget everything in the attainment of its aims. It has only one failing, which is to be sure is a very considerable one. It has no conscience." Paul Omar knew that the great power he had discovered and proved as a gift to all men from God, but his intellect or mind made him forget this, and he took the credit. His behavior was as idiotic as simple Joe Boscher's. He even forgot the law of karma. Take and it will be taken away. Give and it will be given back. He took the credit of power, and he knew he had lost his power. In his bewilderment and shame, fearing the loss of his intellect or mind, he forgot his self-sufficiency for the moment and called upon his soul for assistance. "God, grant me peace," was his prayer. He was at the time in the structure dedicated to God, surrounded by many souls united in devotion to God. There may have been little, if any, unity of mind belief in the song which had preceded his talk. Yet there was a unity of mind understanding in the words, "Come, Holy Ghost, our souls inspire." And regardless of the interpretation of what happened to him, his soul received a message which was carried past the threshold of his consciousness, giving him the peace he desired and satisfying the demand of his soul. He had a higher goal to achieve, and it was not of this world. The power, greater than all it had discovered, was the Spirit of God. When he had acknowledged God as the source of power, he received the Spirit of God and power because one soul and God is a majority. It is the privilege of any man to force his soul to act as if there was no God. He can, if he chooses, mentally believe such a situation to be a fact. He can believe that life on this earth is all there is for him, and according to the philosophy of Paul Omar, that becomes a reality for such as so choose. But believing that the vast majority who have read thus far accept the fact that there is a God who created this world, the stars and the millions of other worlds we mentally know to exist, is it not foolish even to suggest that such a God capable of these wonders does not control his creation? Is it not also foolish, even to our limited minds, to suggest an absence of purpose in the so creating and controlling? Every consciously directed endeavor has an objective or purpose. There is a reason for the action, some result is to be obtained. The law of karma indicates that man wants man to do only that which is pleasing to man. The law of majority indicates that unity of purpose is another desire of his. Doing those things which are pleasing to each other creates a love for one another. A unity of the majority in so doing binds a people together in love, which each man interested in the welfare of his brother, and establishes the operation of the Spirit of God, a power for good greater than all others. The history of man as told in the Bible, or any accurate history of man or nations, indicates clearly that when the majority are not functioning according to the purpose of God, something happens. The Spirit of God takes a hand in the procedure and corrects its situation. Let no one, man or nation, boast that he stand, lest he fall. Success, wealth, power, and man, taking the credit for it, brought on a pride and vanity which caused our world war, the result of which is an example how divine interference in the affairs of men, which should not soon be forgotten, but unfortunately the mind of man forgets quickly. When the Spirit of God in man becomes manifest on this earth, by a majority, the kingdom of God on earth, which Christ prophesied, will become a reality. Paul Omar assumes soul to be the God-given man-power, the power which changed water into wine and raised the dead, while spirit in man is the purpose of God released in him, making truth and love in his life, and making you what in your unselfish moments you long to be, perfect in the spirit of the God your soul knows to exist. Spirit is that something you long for and cannot define, in which, if once secured, completely satisfies you. Spirit is eternal, soul being an intermediate between the material and the spiritual. You may by soul power gain the Spirit of God or accept falseness and death. For as in Adam shall die, 1 Corinthians 15:22, meant to Omar that man, by sins such as Adam committed, lost his spirit. Even so in Christ shall all be made alive, meant that Christ, God in man's form, showed by human example the way to regain the Spirit, and also sent the Holy Ghost as a comforter and guide to truth. The good and true in you is Spirit, and the good and true of the universe is the Spirit of God. Just what God's ultimate objective is for man may not be made known to us, but we do know intuitively by messages from the soul that there is a life beyond the death of the body, and that our spirit goes on to take its place in another world, and that the kind of life lived on this earth will make a difference in the possible opportunities in a life beyond. There will be a continuation of personal identity. The limitations of human life will be removed, and an infinitely closer knowledge of God will be possible. There will be progress and development, and there will be an active service of a broader sphere. For such an immortality, there is a universal seeking implanted in the heart of humanity in all ages. The idea was in the process of development during the Old Testament times. It was completed in the Christian gospel, and it was established by the fact of the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. As to the how of it, as to the where or whether there will be any where about it, as to what people will look like, how they will talk, what they will do, Christianity professes a reverence ignorant. Quoted from Common Sense Religion. Give to the glory of God. God has given you a soul capable of any accomplishment and a mind to direct that soul. You can have what you want, health, power, wealth, and eternal life, but the human mind is so fickle and wicked that such gifts have proved disastrous to many. If drunk with sight of power we lose, wild tongues that have not thee as such boastings as the Gentiles use, or lesser breeds without the law. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. So cautions Kipling in his famous Recessional, and so the third law of the philosophy reads. Law 3. The glorification of God is necessary to continued or eternal advancement. This means in simple words to give God the credit, the glory, and the thanks for your successful accomplishments, and further, to blame your method of thinking for life's misfortune. God is love, and the power of love is the power of God. If you could understand this fully, you would understand life eternal, but the power of God or love is beyond human understanding. The best we can do with our human minds is to use the great power God has given us in expressing His purpose as we see it and glorify Him in thought, word, and deed. You individually can possess the Spirit of God by continually giving out the never-ending supply of love God gives to you. This, however, is not enough. You must also unite with others and increase by unity the spirit and purpose of God on earth. Unity is the elemental virtue and foundation of religious life, and therefore the Church of God is necessary to advancement. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. That is the meaning of the mark of Paul Omar, the cross of Jesus Christ, an ever-present reminder that the glory belongs to God, and the square of humanity below it to remind us that the love we must necessarily give our fellow man in order to live in the fullness of God's love. If you can interpret the meaning of this mark and live it as Paul Omar, you will be filled with abundance of health, wealth, and happiness, and above all, a positive intelligence, that you are training your spirits for an active and purposeful life to come which will be eternal according to God's plan. So endeth the second part of the meaning of the mark. But there may be some among you unable to put into practice the wonderful truth set forth in the story and explanations. For such, a third part, based somewhat upon the application of the mark of success and the philosophy it suggests, now follows. End of Part 2.